Gute Woche. Rabbi Zolkuzunsen began the Farbrengen this afternoon that today is the first Shabbos in the month of Adar. And Bichlal, the month of Adar is different from all months of the year, as already spoken at previous occasions, as the Megillah tells us, in other words, in the month of Adar we celebrate Purim, but Purim is not a yontif which is only limited to that day in the month or to the close by days to before and after Purim. Purim is a yontif which had an effect on the entire month. And that is why the Megillah uses the expression it is the entire month which was turned over from initially it would have been a month of sorrow, chas v'shalom, and it was turned over to be a month of joy. Memela, the Rebbe says, now that we are at the first Shabbos in the month of Adar, and as he explained last week, that this concept of Achodesh and Shanepach Miyogan L'Simcha does not apply only to Adar Sheni. This year that we have two Adars, it applies to both Adars. The only thing is, it is the for halachic reasons, as the Gemara explains, it is in the second Adar that we celebrate Purim. However, this advantage regarding the month of Adar, that it's a month Shanepach Miyogan L'Simcha, this the Rebbe says applies to both of the Adars, to both months. Especially, he says, when we have an Adar Rishna and an Adar Sheni, we have an opportunity to have this outstanding month for approximately double the amount of time as it would be in an ordinary year. Though the Rebbe says most years we have only one Adar, as the Rambam explains, that in a cycle of 19 years, the Rambam tells us, we have 12 years that are Kesidron, 12 regular years that are not leap years, where we have only one Adar, and it is 7 years that are leap years. So the majority of the years are not leap years. In other words, if it's not a leap year, we have only one Adar. But these years, as this year is one of them, when we have two Adars, we are fortunate that we have this outstanding month lasting actually for 2 months. And as the Rebbe mentioned later, there's a halach in Shulchan Aruch that a Yid that has a conflict with a Goy, the best time to settle it is in the month of Adar. And the Gemara uses the expression because in the month of Adar it is Bari Mazle. The Mazl of a Yid is healthy, is strong in the month of Adar. And this, the Rebbe says, again also applies to both Adars. Not only, we cannot say that this would apply only to Adar Sheni, this applies to Adar Rishon as well. So Memela, now we are in the first Shabbos of such an outstanding period of time as both others are going to be. In addition to being the first Shabbos in Adar, the Rebbe continues, it is also Parshas Terumah. Says we don't have to go far. Let us just translate what is the meaning of the word of Terumah. Terumah means Aufgehobenkeit in Yiddish, an uplifting, an elevation. So this corresponds very well to what we're talking about. We're talking about that we're in the middle of entering the first Shabbos, the month of Adar. Here comes, and Adar, we are told, is an entire month, which is a month of Simcha, and this year we have 2 months of Simcha. Now comes the first Shabbos in these 2 months, and this Shabbos is Parashas Terumah. Terumah is again a concept of an elevation, a spiritual uplifting. Now let us look at the date. The date is today is Erev Zayin Adar. Tonight is Zayin Adar. Zayin Adar, we know, is the birthday as well as the Yom HaYortzeit of Moshe Rabbeinu. In fact, we all know what the Gemara tells us, that Haman, when he was throwing lots, what would be a suitable month to Chas v'Shalom fulfill his decree. So the Goyel came out on the month of Adar. So he was very happy. He said, aha, Adar is the right month, Chas v'Shalom, for what he intended. Why? Because Adar, Moshe Rabbeinu passed away. The Gemara continues, however, Haman did not know that it's not only that he passed away in the month of Adar, he was also born in the month of Adar. Zayin Adar is the birthday of Moshe Rabbeinu, and Zayin Adar is the day when Moshe Rabbeinu passed away. And this again has a very obvious shaykhs to Parshas Terumah. Terumah is spelled Tov Reish Vav Mem Hey. If we were to take the letters of Terumah, we can put together the word Torah Mem. What does Torah Mem mean? Torah. The shaykhs to Mem. So Rabbi brought two pshatim. One pshat, Mem, it was given on Har Sinai, and then Moshe went for 40 days to Shamayim to be mekabel the Torah. So the inyan of Torah being given into this world, this has a shaykhs to Terumah Torah Mem. That's one interpretation. Another interpretation the Rebbe mentioned is that Terumah is Torah Mem, but the Mem doesn't not necessarily has to do with the Arboim Yoim. The Mem is a reminder of Moshe, because Moshe was the one who kibel Torah Mesinai, who was the emissary of HaKadosh Baruch Hu to relate Torah to Yidden. It was Moshe Rabbeinu. And the Rebbe continued, just like, what is the contents of this week's Sedra? Parshas Terumah. Terumah tells us about Va'asu li mikdash v'shachanti b'soicham. That HaKadosh Baruch Hu is dwelling His Shechina amongst us Yidden. And the famous Chazal, b'soichai lo nema ela b'soicham, meaning that within every Yid, the Rebishter is dwelling there. That is a mokim mishkan for the Shechina. The same, it also tells us how the Torah came down into this world. The Rebbe explained that the Rebbe tells us in Tanya, right away in the Haggadah, in the first parak of Tanya, that there are shivim panim l'Torah. There are 70 different ways how inyanim and Torah can be interpreted. We all know that Chazal, Elu ve'elu divrei Elokim chayim, when we have differences in the opinion, we say both are originated from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. However, when it comes to halacha, la'asukish maitza libe de hilchas, when we have to paskin a halacha, which means how Torah comes down unto this world, how we have to live with Torah, here we only have one opinion. We cannot go according to two opinions, either this one or that one. So when it comes to la'asukish maitza libe de hilchas, when it comes to paskin a halacha, here we accept Torah as Torah comes down into one opinion. This is how Torah comes down onto this world. Torah Mem, both interpretations of Torah Mem, where the Torah Mem, how it's the Arboim Yoim, which is also Arboim Yoim, shows the shaykhs of Torah to Zman. Then we have Torah Mem, an interpretation of Torah Moshe, who was Moshe Kibel Torah Misinai. This shows the shaykhs of Torah to Mokim. We know in this world there are two inyanim. There's an inyan of Zman, and there's an inyan of Mokim. Time and space. And Torah came down into this Gashmiistic world, and here the Rebbe explained the lesson, the moral which we have to derive from all this is, especially in light that a Yid lives with the concept of Mailam B'Kodesh, how he constantly has to keep on going higher and higher in Kedusha. So what does this show us? This shows us how a Yid has to conquer the world with Torah and illuminate the world with Torah. That this is the whole idea of Torah. This is the lesson which we take from this week's Sedra. Just like there's an inyan of Asul Mikdash v'Shachanti b'Soicham, how the Shechin is coming down into this world, the same inyan is with Torah as well. To see to it that in every corner of the world, all over, Torah reaches. Then the Rebbe continued regarding Zayin Adar, which is the birthday of Moshe Rabbeinu as well as the Yom HaYortzeit of Moshe Rabbeinu. And he explained that Bichlal, we know there's another Yortzeit, a very popular Yortzeit, which is Lag B'Omer. And Lag B'Omer, we know that Alter Rebbe explains in L'Kutei Torah that Lag B'Omer, even for those who fast on a Yom HaYortzeit, Lag B'Omer, nobody fasts. Even though on one hand Lag B'Omer comes out in the middle of the days of Sfira, and those are not happy days. It comes to Lag B'Omer, which is the Yortzeit of Reb Shimon ben Yochai. This was his wish, this was his instruction, his will, that the day of his passing away from this world should be celebrated as a Yom HaHilula. And that is why Taka Yortzeit of Tzaddik is called Yom Hilula. Hilula in Aramaic means a chasana. Well, it's because it's an initial simcha.
It's marriage.
As explained in Chassidus. Benegeye Zayin Oda. So in Hilchas Taines, it is taka brought. The Rebbe says that there are some that do fast on Zayin Oda. However, the Rebbe says these halachas are very unpopular because the halachas of Taines are at the very end of the Shulchan Aruch. So Mamela, when we begin learning the Shulchan Aruch, first we learn the halachas that come before that. So by the time we finish the Shulchan Aruch and get to the halachas which discuss Hilchas Taines, so that's why it's very unpopular. And besides, the Rebbe says, the Alter Rebbe tells us, Haguf kinyonei shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that one's body is the possession of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Who does the guf belong to? The guf does not belong to us, it belongs to the Eibishter. And therefore we are not allowed to do things which can be dangerous to the guf, or not only dangerous, or in yonim which are not positive for the guf. Mamela, the Rebbe says the entire inyan of fasting, especially by Chassidim, was not an accepted concept based on this inyan that aguf kinyonei shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Mamela, for the guf, it's not profitable to fast. So Mamela, that is why we do not see taka by Chassidim that the inyan of Zayin Oda, the day of Zayin Oda, should be used as a Yom HaTzoim, as a day of Tons. Talking about the inyan of Zayin Oda and the greatness of Zayin Oda, I've said that there's literature and invitations and regarding to a Malava Malka which is taking place on Zayin Oda. I was referring to the Malava Malka which is taking place tonight for the benefit of the shul of the Avas Moshe shul. Rabbi says it's very strange. People are being invited to a Malava Malka, and the idea of a Malava Malka is that Yidden should donate for a Beis HaKnesses. And naturally, it is the wish of those who are inviting people to this Malava Malka that the donations should be not donations. See, in this week's Seder it's discussed how the Yidden have contributed to the Mishkan. So that the Pasuk says it was Zahav, Kesef, and Achoishes. Gold, silver, and copper. So it means that at the various levels of contributing. Rabbi says definitely they are looking for contributions in the level of gold, not only in the level of silver and copper. And such a suitable day, which tonight, especially the name of the shul is also Avas Moshe, and on the invitation and all the literature for the Malava Malka, it is not mentioned that tonight is Zayin Oda. Zayin Oda is the idea, if it's an outstanding day, especially when it has a shaykhus to a shul which is named Avas Moshe. And the Rebbe says, unless from Terumah we go into Tetzaveh. Tetzaveh, Pashas Tetzaveh. And in Pashas Tetzaveh, we know that beginning from Pasha Shmois, in every single Seder, Moshe Rabbeinu's name is mentioned. There's one exception, Pashas Tetzaveh. So Mamela the Rebbe says maybe they had in mind that being that it's Pashas Tetzaveh, and in Pashas Tetzaveh Moshe Rabbeinu's name is not mentioned, so that is why in the invitation as well they didn't refer it being the date of Zayin Oda. Talking about the Inyan, how in Pashas Tetzaveh Moshe Rabbeinu's name is not mentioned, the Rebbe explained Al Pi Chasidus, Tetzaveh begins Va'ato Tetzaveh. Who is the Va'ato? Moshe Rabbeinu. Kodesh Baruch Hu is addressing himself to Moshe Rabbeinu. Just like when we say a bracha, we say Baruch Ato. So Chassidus explains here, a Yid has an opportunity how he's talking noichach directly to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. There's no closer way of directing the Rebishter, of addressing the Rebishter, than by saying Ato. You, straight, you Rabbeinu Shalom. The Melech Rebbe is explaining, so Chassidus explains that Pashas Tetzaveh Taka does not mention Moshe Rabbeinu by name, but really here the shaykhus to Moshe Rabbeinu is yet stronger and higher than mentioning him by name. That's why it begins Va'ata Tetzaveh, HaKadosh Baruch Hu talking directly. There's no better way of addressing to Moshe Rabbeinu than Va'ata you directly, you Moshe Rabbeinu. And he means Moshe Rabbeinu. So that's what Chassidus explains. Taka big golui, Moshe Rabbeinu's name is Taka not mentioned in Va'ata Tetzaveh. But Behelem, Bipnimiyas, it is mentioned on a yet higher madrege than if his name would be there b'feish. It's customary later in the Farbrengen, the Rebbe learned a Rashi in this week's Seder, as well as explained a Rambam Shiurim of the Rambam. The Rebbe again spoke about the importance of making siyumim on the Rambam. Because the siyum Rambam, for those that learn 3 parakim a day, will be at the end of this month, the end of the month of Adar Rishon. The Rebbe says, being that this is already the second siyum, So it's definite that those that have participated in the first siyum should zicha participate in this, and also to attract panim chadoshes, to attract new faces that should participate in the siyum Rambam, and it should be done in a proper way of beroiv hadras melech, with a large attendance. This is the real glory for the melech, a real covet for the melech. The Rebbe also suggested that being that, as it's customary by a siyum and an inyan of Torah, that inyanim of Torah are discussed, but being again that here we are looking for a big crowd, and when there's a big crowd, many different people from different levels are there, and therefore it is hard to get involved in explaining an inyan in Torah really in depth, especially with Maramekaimes, footnotes, and referring to various places in Torah. However, it would be advisable, the Rebbe says, that after the siyum, all the inyanim in Torah which were discussed on the siyum should be published. And when it's published, here it could be published in a way with Maramekaimes and adding on things which were not said at the siyum in public, but at least here in writing for one who wants to be ma'ayin in the inyan deeper and have a deeper understanding, or if he should be given Maramekaimes where he could look, where he could cook nach and look after from more details and for more explanation on all these inyanim, it would be extremely advisable. The Rebbe suggests that everything should be published after the siyumin. Regarding the parsha, today's parsha, Parshas Terumah, the Rebbe began with one inyan. He says an inyan which is discussed in many of the Mefarshim, which Rashi does not comment on. And especially that when we know that Rashi's inyan is to explain Pshutei Shel Mikra, and that when there's a very obvious and simple question, why Taka doesn't Rashi explain it? And the question is, the Torah begins in Parshas Terumah, that the Rebbe says, V'osu li mikdash v'shechanti b'seicha. What does the Torah begin with? What is the first thing Moshe was told to make? V'asu aron atzei shitim, to make an aron. So the Ramban, the Rebbe says, makes a very big issue that Rashi brings the inyan later that it was a comment from Betzalel. Betzalel commented, first it's suitable to make when one designs a house, first he makes the house, then he makes the furniture, what comes into the house, and all the decorations that come into the house. And by the Mishkan, the Rebbe said it should be done in a different way. But right here, as soon as the Torah comes out with this tzivui, with the commandment, the Rebbe says what should be erected first? The Aron. So the question arises, why the Aron? The Mishkan was not made yet. Nothing was made. What should be made? The Aron. And the Ramban, Taka, who raises this question and elaborates on this question, discusses it at length, comes to a conclusion. Why Taka does the Torah begin with the Aron before any of the other inyanim of the Mishkan? So the Ramban explains that the Iker inyan, the main thing of the Mishkan, was the Aron. The Aron had the luchis within it, and this is the meaning of Torah, and this is the main yisoid of the Mishkan, is the Aron. And that is why the Torah has begun, after giving the introduction of Asuli Mikdash v'shechanti b'seicham, what did the Rebbe tell Moshe Rabbeinu should be made first, the Aron. However, Rashi does not comment on this. Rashi doesn't say anything. V'asuli Mikdash, Rashi says, V'asuli Shmi, Bayis Kedusha, make for my name, the Rebbeinu Shalom says, a house of holiness. But Rashi does not explain why is it that the Aron was the first thing to be made out of all the inyanim of the Mishkan. So the Rebbe says, so we must say that if Rashi does not explain it, that the explanation is so simple and so plain that for the child who's following the Psukim in Chumash, he will understand it without Rashi telling us anything. The Rebbe says, if we go through the Psukim, the series of the Psukim, we see after the Aron, the Yidden were told that the Kruvim had to be made. What is the whole idea? The Kruvim and the Kapayres, and then the pasuk continues in Kapitel Chav Hey, pasuk Chav Beis, V'nei aditi l'chasham. The Rebbeinu Shalom is telling Moshe Rabbeinu that when I will make up a time to meet with you and to relate to you, where will it be? There. Where there? Where the Kruvim are. Where the Kapayres is. Which is, where were the Kruvim? The Kruvim were on top of the Yom. So, it's obvious from the psukim that this is the main inyan of the Mishkan, because this is what the Rabbeinu Shalom said, that this is where Shechinah is going to be. Particularly because he's stressing, "V'ne'adati lecha sham v'dibarti itcha." The Rebbe says, "I will talk with you, Moshe Rabbeinu, from where me'ala kapeires mebein shnei akruvim." Where were the kruvim? The pasuk says, "Befeirish asher al haroina edus." From there, I will tell you, "Eis kol asher atzava eis chol b'nei Yisrael," everything which you shall relate to the Yid. The Melech Rebbe says there's no need for Rashi to say anything. If we go through the series of the psukim, we see it was the Oren. The Oren had the Kruvim on top of it. That is where the Kaperes was. The Melech Rebbe says itself understood that, being that HaKadosh Baruch himself says that this will be the place of the Ne'adati L'cha, this is where the Rabbeinu Shalom will meet and relate to Moshe Rabbeinu, that this is the main union of the Mishkan. So that's why Rashi does not get involved in any explanation. However, there is a Rashi, Rebbe says, which Taka does need an explanation.
Your mom is in a different place.
Let's leave questions for later, please. And that is there was the cover in Kapitel Chaf Hey, Pasuk Yud Zayin. The first Pasuk Sheni. Pasuk says, "V'asisa kapoiras zohav toya." Amasayim v'chetzi orka, 2.5 amos, that should be the length. V'ama v'chetzi rochba, and the width should be an amma v'chetzi. If we look into Rashi, amma v'chetzi orka, what does Rashi tell us? That the kapoiras was the same size as the oren. Ke'orkoi shel oren, just like the length of the oren. The rochba, and its width, was ke'rochba shel oren, like the width of the oren. This was like a cover on top of the oren. And this was lying on top of the oren. Now Rashi raises a question. Even though the Torah does not tell us how thick was the kapoiras, Pirshu Rabbeinu, the Chachamim did tell us. What do they tell us? Shehoya uvya tefach, that the thickness of the kapoiras was a tefach. The Rebbe says, if we go through all the Klei HaMishkan, we will notice that there are many of the Klei HaMishkan where we are not told, neither by the pasuk, neither by Rashi, how thick they were. The Rebbe says, just to cite one very obvious example, the menorah. The menorah, we are told all the details about the menorah. Obviously, we think we go through all the details of the menorah, exactly what the menorah looked like. Now the question arises, how thick was the menorah? What was the thickness of the gold? Rashi doesn't say anything, the pasuk doesn't say anything, and Rashi passes by without saying. And let us not forget, Rashi is not the Baraisa of Melechas HaMishkan. There's a Baraisa which tells us exactly all the details of Melechas HaMishkan. This is not Rashi's inyan. Rashi's inyan is to say pshat in the psukim. So what is bothering Rashi, that Rashi is raising the question, even though the Torah did not tell us how thick the kapoiras was, still pirshu rabbeinu. And again, Rashi doesn't use the expression dorshu rabbeinu, which is a very common expression in Rashi. And when Rashi does use dorshu, it means has a shayches to drush. Rashi says pirshu rabbeinu. Asimin, it's negayet to pshat. To the pshat of the pasuk, it has no shayches to drush. To understand that the thickness of the thickness of the kapoiras was a tefach. Why does Rashi have to get involved in it? Truth is, it's a Gemara. The Gemara brings several opinions. Rashi doesn't get involved in bringing all the several opinions. Rashi brings only the opinion that claims that the thickness of the kapoiras was a tefach. If we look into the Gemara, we will see the Gemara uses the expression koimosoi tefach. Koimosoi means the height. Rashi, in the Gemara, explains what's the pshat, the height of the kapiras was a tefach. So Rashi there tells us the expression, it means the thickness. The thickness and the height is actually the same. Uvya. And Rashi here does not use taka the Lashon HaGemara. Rashi here uses the Lashon which he himself has explained in Gemara regarding the word keimasai, that it means the thickness. Why? This is very simple. Because when we're talking about something which is real high, then the expression of koima, of height, is suitable. When we're talking about something which is only high, a tefach, the suitable expression to describe it is not the height, but rather the thickness. It's a small thing. We're not discussing the Gemara now. Rashi is limiting his words to that we should understand the pasuk. To understand the pasuk, the best way to understand it is when it's only a tefach. So a tefach, we explain, it's thick a tefach. Why does Rashi have to get involved into this whole thing? Rebbe explains that the child who's learning Chumash, question comes into his mind. We know that this was made from what? From pure gold. It did not have any copper mixed in it, any other items were not mixed in it. It was made of pure gold. So the question arises, make something from pure gold. Make it in this size of amasayim v'cheitzi orka. It should be 2.5 amas long, and an amma v'cheitzi rochpa, and an amma v'cheitzi wide, and go ahead and design a tray or a cover, whatever you want to call it, from this size in the length and this size in the width. The Rebbe says, for anyone who's familiar with gold, will realize that this piece of gold would not hold out. It'll have to crack. Because it's that thin, and it's quite a sizable piece, so it wouldn't hold out. So that's why the child is learning Chumash. He sees that the Torah is telling us Vasisa Kapiras, and what should the Kapiras be? The pasuk stresses Zahav Toir, pure gold. What should be the size of the Kapiras? Amasayim v'cheitzi olka, v'ama v'cheitzi rochba. So the child is troubled. How will a thing like this hold out? The minute you'll move it, you'll start moving. A small piece of gold could hold out. You're going to take a thin piece of gold, and you're going to make it pretty long and pretty wide. It's going to crack. It's going to split. So that's why Rashi says, Rashi's learning with the child, even though the Torah didn't tell us how thick it is, but I'm going to have to tell you. And it's not an union of drash. This is negeya to the pshat to understand the pasuk. Pirshu Rabbeinu. The Chachamim have interpreted. What was the height or the thickness of this cover? It was a tefach. And Mele, if it was a tefach, it had body to itself, so it was able to hold out. So that is why Rashi has to get involved in this inyan, though many other Klei HaMishkan, Rashi does not explain neither. Rashi, neither the pasuk tell us how thick it was, or certain other details which are missing, l'gabe various Klei HaMishkan, because there we could go through and learn this specific keli, and it's not negeya to understand the height or the thickness or whatever particular case it may be, this individual case. Over here, when we're talking about a thin cover, about a cover which was made out of pure gold, Rashi must tell us that we should know that it was uvye tefach. So, talking about this inyan, Rabbi referred to an inyan which Rabbi refers to it many times, and he says that the old-time Melamed, old-time Rebbe who would learn with the children in Chayda, wouldn't think that this is what Rashi comes to Bavar. That this is the question which is bothering Rashi, and Rashi is coming to solve this question. This is very simple, because the old Melamed, the old Shtetl, it was a poor life, poor standard of living. Especially when we're talking about a Melamed, the Melamed probably never saw a sizable piece of gold in his life. The Rebbe says the Melamed will never be troubled with this type of a question and be able, and should dawn on him such type of an interpretation, because he never came across this inyan. And like talking about this, the Rebbe says there are many things which, like the old time Melamdim had an attitude, they took things for granted and never explained it to the children. And even if the child would raise questions and want to understand, the attitude of the Melamed would be, Vest älter werden, wirst du wissen, you'll get older, you'll understand. For example, the Rebbe says, very famous pasuk which is learned in Chayda, when we learn about the Teva. We learn about the Teva which Noach erected. Aseilecha Tevas. The Rebbe told Noach he should make a Teva. Atzei Goifer. So how do all the Malamdim teach? What does Atzei Goifer mean? Pimpsenholz. It's a Yiddish expression. So the child asks his Rebbe, what does Pimpsenholz mean? It's a type of wood. Rebbe starts telling him, yes, there are trees of Pimpsenholz, and this is the Pimpsenholz tree, and the Pimpsenholz wood. But the child says, but he wants to know what Pimpsenholz is. So again, it's like an expression, a taich, which has been adopted by Malamdim for years, and this is how we've been taiching for years, that what is the wood which was used for the Teva? For the Teva it was used Atzei Goifer. The Pasuk says Atzei Goifer. What does Atzei Goifer mean? Pimpsenholz. And talking about this, the Rebbe brought another example. Rebbe got into explain what it looked like when the Yidden had to leave Mitzrayim. So when the Yidden had to leave Mitzrayim, they all had to be Makriv the Korban Pesach. They had to be Makriv the Korban Pesach, and there are the details of the Korban Pesach. We know Pesach Mitzrayim was different than Pesach Deiras. There were specific rules, specific halachas which had to be adhered to in Pesach Mitzrayim. And the Yidden had to take the sheep 4 days before Yud Nisan, 4 days before they were Makriv the Korban Pesach. They had to take the behemoth and tie it to the Kari Hamita, tie it to the bedposts. So the Rebbe says, he asked the Melamed, what did the Yid do with the sheep? So he had it tied to the bedpost, but he could have walked around with it in the street also during these 4 days, or couldn't he? He says it's very simple. Where was the bed? The bed was not in the street. The bed was in the house, in the bedroom. So if the Torah tells us, the Chazal tells us it was tied to the Kari Hamita, to the bedpost, so naturally they couldn't tie it and then take it and walk around the streets with it and then bring it back and tie it again, especially when we know that one of the reasons why they had to take it 4 days before was that they should check the behemoth to make sure that the behemoth has no mum. The behemoth is complete, there's nothing wrong with it. So if you're going to take the behemoth and march with it, parade with it in and out of the house, and walk through the streets of Mitzrayim with it, just to show the Mitzrayim that you're not afraid of them, and you're going to shech their Avodah Zarah. He says this is the most easiest chance for the behemoth to get a mum, by walking in and out and walking through all the streets with it. So like the Rebbe was trying to explain that at times we have to take inyanim, and the way a child takes an inyan and understands it in his pashtus and his simplicity, this is the real, authentic pshat of the inyan which we may be discussing. And the same thing when we're talking here, lagabe, the behemoth, the seh, which was tied to the Kari Hamita, to the bedpost. It was taka standing there for 4 days without any chachmas. This is what the Rebbe told the Yidden to do, and this is what they did, and not that they let loose the behemoths and took them out and brought them in again. We can definitely not learn it that way. But maybe the same thing here, getting back to our Rashi. This is why Rashi is compelled to explain us that there was body, there was a thickness to the kaperas, to the cover, and that is why it was able to hold out and last out and exist. In the Farbrengen, the Rebbe referred to a famous word from the Mittaler Rebbe. Mittaler Rebbe said that when two Yidden get together, they are much more powerful than one Yid is himself. And he explained that when two Yidden get together, it is 2 nefesh elikis from each one of the Yidden against 1 nefesh habahamis. Rabbi added on, why only against one? Each one of them has a nefesh habahamis. Every Yid has, just like we have a nefesh elikis, we have the nefesh habahamis. Rabbi says because there's a klal, ein odam choite v'loy loy. A man does not sin unless for himself. One doesn't sin for somebody else. The Mela, when a Yid is in a problem, and he goes and he discusses it with his friend, so I taka have my Yetzirah, my nefesh habahamis, who's interfering in this particular problem. However, my friend's Yetzirah is a different Yetzirah. It's not going to have the same desire to do the same aveira as mine does, because he has his aveira, what he wants to do. So when two Yidden get together, the Rebbe says it's 2 nefesh elikis against 1 nefesh habahamis. So this is really the advantage of Yidden getting together one with another. Especially the Rebbe says when Yidden get together in a Hasidische Farbrengen, then there's the famous vote which was related from the Rabbeim, how great the accomplishment of a Hasidische Farbrengen is, that what a Hasidische Farbrengen accomplishes, it is more than what Malach Machol can accomplish. So this the Rebbe led into, again he referred to the Melava Malka which is taking place tonight, and he's going to give mashke for this Melava Malka, which is the participation from the Farbrengen into this Melava Malka. So Melava Malka is again an Indian Suda David Malka Meshichet. Melava Malka in itself is something very praiseworthy. It's the Suda which has a shaykhs to David HaMelech, especially when we're talking a Melava Malka which is going to take place on Zayin Adar, and Zayin Adar is tied in with Moshe Rabbeinu. Moshe Rabbeinu, he's the Goyal Rishon, he's the Goyal Achroin. Especially Melava Malka, which is taking place already on a Motzei Shabbos when we're a week into the month. Here the Rebbe referred that when we are Mechadish the Levana, we are always careful when we bless the moon, when we say Kiddush Levana, it should always be a week into the month. That is the Lubavitcher custom, not to do it before. Memela, so we're already a week into the month, so this is already a good standing in the month of Adar, and we know how special Adar is, as discussed before. A month of the entire month, and it's a month of Bari Mazla. It's a very special month, a very special time. So Melava Malka, which is taking place tonight, is really a very great Indian. As customary, that's what the Chazal tells us. As customary in the Farbrengens, that the Rebbe also learns an Indian in the Rambam, and today it is in the Rambam. Of Hilchas Malva, Hilchas Sanhedrin. Hilchas Sanhedrin, where the Torah tells us, the Rambam, Torah, is telling us how careful Dayanim are supposed to be when they are paskening a case. And the Rambam begins in Perek Chaf Aleph, Mitzvahs Esse Lishpot HaShefet B'Tzedek. Shenema b'tzedek tishpet hamisecha. That when a judge, a dayan, is handling a problem, he has to be sure and make sure that he's paskening honest. And the Rambam explains that when he handles the Din Torah, he should also handle it. He should not express any priority to one of the tzaddim more than to the other one, to one of the people involved. Because the Rambam says, the minute the dayan begins to express more patience or more interest, or whatever the case may be, to one of the people involved, then the other one is automatically kind of nistat mutanoisav. In other words, it's getting hard for him to react. Why? Because psychologically he gets a strange feeling, because he sees how the dayan is expressing more interest or more friendship or whatever the case may be to his opponent. So here himself, this in itself is creating within him a feeling that it's going to be hard for him to speak up. It's going to be hard for him to put up his case properly. Now listen to the next halach in the Rambam. Shnei baladinim, two people who were arguing each other. Shahaya echad mehem melubish begodim yikarim. One of them was dressed in expensive clothing. V'hasheni melubish begodim bezuyin. And the other one is dressed very embarrassing clothing. The halacha is oimer lemechubad. We are obligated to tell the person who is dressed nicely and dressed expensively. We tell him as follows: Oy halbishehu kamoischa, or see to it that your opponent whom you are having a case with should be able to dress the same way as you do. In other words, go out and lend him a suit, or buy him a suit, or whatever. Ad shetodin imoy, or you have another alternative. Lavush kamoisai. Go out and put on the same type of clothes he's wearing, and then you'll both come back here, and the dayanim will handle the case. Ad shetiyu shavin, until both of you will be dressed equally. Achar kach tamdu bedin, then you will be able to come in front of the judge, in front of the dayan, and he will be able to listen to both of them. Rebbe says, let us see how far, to what extent, the Torah considers the feeling of a Yid. We have one who is dressed in very expensive clothing. The other one who is dressed very degrading clothing. And could be he's dressed that way because he can't afford to buy anything better than that. What do we tell him? We say the other person either dress up the same way or go ahead and buy clothes for this person. Buy clothes for this person. Or lend him a suit or whatever. That means that the recipient of the expensive clothes knows very well that he's only getting this for time being. He knows his matzav, he knows his situation, he knows that he can't afford an expensive suit. And he knows that he's going to be wearing this only for a couple of hours of the session of the Din Torah. So we know that not everybody is going to be that much uplifted by it. However, the Torah has taken this into consideration. The Torah has gone that far. And the Rebbe kept on referring that there's a Rambam, that the Rambam tells us that all inyanim of mitzvahs, of Torah and mitzvahs, were given liyasher habriyos. It's given to straighten out people, that people should push it fir sich ehrlich and straight and proper. And the Rebbe says this halacha goes in line with this general rule which the Rambam has given us. So the Rambam tells us, perhaps there will be a Yid who will be broken from the fact that he's coming before Bezdin, and perhaps Bezdin, the Dayan, who's also only human, will show out a bigger interest and a warmer interest and more respect to the person who comes in dressed beautifully. The other one who's dressed very poor will not arouse any feeling of respect by the Dayan. So the Torah has gone that far to tell us that we have to make sure that both of the people are dressed on the same standard. Because if not, when the Dayan will begin showing more interest to the one who's dressed richer, this will cause that the one who's dressed big day bizoyen, as the Rambam uses the expression, will be nistat muta noisaf. It'll be hard for him to talk. He will not be able to present his case properly. He will look kind of like lose himself. So here we see how far the Torah has gone to see to it that a case is handled properly, that even things which obviously they seem as side things, these are not inyanim which play such a major role. We may think these are side things, zeitige Sachen. The Torah tells us no. If we want to fulfill betzedek tishbet amisecha, to honestly judge our fellow Jews, we have to take into consideration the emotion of a Yid, the feeling of a Yid. If he will feel degraded by the fact that the one who is having a Din Torah with him is dressed very richly and very elaborate and very nice, and he Nebuch is dressed big de bezoyen, so the Torah tells us you cannot proceed this Din Torah unless both baladinim are dressed equally. Here the Rebbe says we see how important it is, the feeling of a Yid. And while talking about this inyan, the Rebbe mentioned that sometimes one of us may go over to somebody else and tell him a few words, and these will be a few sharp words. And later we will say, I didn't tell him anything, because I apologized to him already. And we have an easy feeling about it, because if I apologize to him, whatever I told him is like forgotten. Rabbi says, what you told him were words that really went into his, Rabbi used the expression that went into his atzomis, went into his bones, into his kishkis, and really took the person apart. That you don't care about. You say, I told him something, so I told him. And just to make everybody around feel good, I apologized already to him also. So if I apologize, so I'm zichar Yid now. Here we see from this Rambam how we have to take in consideration the feeling of a Yid. How important it is, and then again, in order to live up to the general rules the Rambam has given to us, that the Torah came liyasher es habriyos, to straighten out people and make sure that our thinking is straight, and our doings are straight, and our behavior is a straight one. It goes to such an extent that the feeling of a baldin has to be taken into consideration when we want to fulfill the halacha of betzedek tishbet amisecha.